In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abercast. We are the brave and bold.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Stigmata Studios presents The Jinn Jihad. The Jinn Jihad kicks your face with myths, mysteries, epic battles, suicide bombers, quirky characters, and divine power armor. In this epic graphic novel, the warrior archangels descend on a city in chaos. It's all-out war. The non-standard assembly battles an ancient terrorist organization and their ultimate weapon, the corrupted, magically enhanced, unstoppable monster, the Jinn. This graphic novel is a wild ride. It's one part distant Arab myth, one part Old Testament angelic vengeance, and one part unique heroic tough guys. Available on Amazon. Get more info on the Jinn Jihad and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
The Armenian men that were arrested were put into stocks. Their feet were shod with nails like horses. Lids, eyelashes, fingernails, and teeth were torn out. They were strung up by their feet. And similar things. Of course, many of them died. But the missionaries were able to treat some. That is how we got to see these injuries. It was written by Elma Johansson, who is a Swedish mercenary. Horseshoes, son! Horseshoes! Bam, 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 bam. That shit would fucking suck. I am the boogeyman. Hiya!
The Abercast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Welcome to the Abercast. Trigger warning right off the top. As you might be able to guess, we're going to get into some pretty dark shit tonight. So, trigger warning. If you're a Turkish person, you might get triggered. If you're a Muslim, you might get triggered. If you're an Armenian, you might get triggered. If you're a Christian, you might get triggered. If you're a young Turk, like in the Turkish army, you might get triggered. And if you're a young Turk, a member of the leftist news organization, you might get triggered. Yeah. So art. I did the cover of the Wicked Library this week, I guess. So if you go to thewickedlibrary.com, I'm sure that's what it is. Or if you go to society-13.com, you can see my brilliant artwork on the cover of whatever the name of the story is this week. This week we are going to be talking about some. In this episode, we're going to be talking about some pretty fucked up stuff. Tackling one of the most fucked up chapters of human history. So go ahead and pour yourself a Jin Jihad, son, and mix it up with your horseshoe and your nails. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Armenian Genocide. I'm not sure if I like genocide better or Holocaust better. I like Holocaust because it ties it into the Nazis, and there's a couple different ties into the Nazis, but genocide, I'm not sure. It's the first genocide of the 20th century. We'll iron it out as we get through this thing. I guarantee it. So my challenge tonight is going to be trying to make this fun in some kind of way, because this is some awful shit we're going to be talking about. Oh, I forgot I have a double fold thing here. I just saw that this is timely for a number of different reasons. I just saw that Bruce Wayne and Poe Dameron were being in a movie apparently about this Holocaust/genocide. In elementary school, I had a pen pal. I had a little pen pal. She was a little Turkish girl who lived in Constantinople. And it went a lot like this, like, "Hey, I'm a Southern Baptist. What kind of religion are you?" "I'm a Muslim." And I never heard from her again. That might have went backwards. So you might be like, "What are you doing talking about this Armenian genocide? Like, what do you know about this Armenian genocide, John Towers?" So when I was researching and studying and stuff for my book, The Djinn Jihad, it didn't take me too long to get to this Armenian genocide. Now, like, I was a big fan of this TV show called The Shield with Vic Mackey. He was a crooked cop, and like one of the whole seasons was him dealing with trying to steal the money, this Armenian money train from this Armenian mob. And there, in some of those episodes, they were like, "We need to have an Armenian Recognition Day or something." And I was like, "Why? What the fuck is up with that?" And then that was the dude, Marco Drazian or something. He cut off fucking people's feet, which might have something to do with this. I don't know. And then there was this thing that happened. I think it was like in 2013 or something, like where we were trying to use. Now, Turkey is we count them as one of our allies. We actually use some of their territory to get to the Middle East to fly planes and stuff over. And I remember there was this big dust up where these Democrats all of a sudden were like, "Well, we need to pay recognition to this Armenian genocide." And everyone's like, "Why are you bringing this shit up now, like 100 years later? Like, what the fuck?" Well, it turns out that they were just trying to piss the Turks off so they wouldn't let us fly over their fucking airspace or something. So I was always like, well, what's that all about too? And then like these young Turks came out and they were like, "We're going to be like this alternative news source for the leftists or whatever." And I'm like, what's this name, Young Turks or whatever? So I learned all of that stuff. And I was doing research for the Djinn Jihad, and it didn't take me too long to get to the Armenian Genocide. It was basically like the Hashashins and the Old Man of the Mountain, check. Battle of Tours, check. Song of Roland, check. The Crusades, check. Armenian Genocide, check. 9/11, check. And we're there. So now that you see where I'm coming from and my relationship to this story, let's get into it a little bit right after this. Fools. always just jumps right out. Okay, so I'm going to start our story with this fucking guy. He was the 34th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. He was the last effective autocrat, they say. And this guy, he's such an asshole. He has a series of massacres named after him. His name is Abdul Hamid II, or Abdul Hamid II. I don't know. He was in power from 1876 to 1909. He's a string of massacres named after him. They were called the Hamadian massacres. And he had a couple of great names. He had a couple of great names. They called him the Red Sultan and Abdullah the Damned. Now, these are some fucking heavy metal comic book names, if I ever heard them. And they both of these names refer to these Hamidian massacres. The Red Sultan because of the blood and all that stuff, and Abdul the Damned because of all the fucking people that were damned to death. These massacres went against Armenians and other refugees during his rule. He used secret police. He fought with the Syrians and Greeks that were in the area. But the main people we're going to be talking about are these Armenians. Now, these Armenians weren't refugees. They were just living on their land, and the Ottoman Empire expanded at one point and kind of took over their land. So, like, all the Armenians that were there were like, well, we're Armenians now, but we're also in the Ottoman Empire, if you know what I'm saying. So, what this meant was, in the Ottoman Empire, this is actually with Islam in general. You can practice another religion. You can be of another belief in a Mohammedan land, but you were under demitude. You were a demi under a demitude. And what is a demitude, you might ask? What is a demi? This is when you're like a second-class citizen, and you have to pay a higher tax just to live there for their, like, protection or whatnot. And this is actually a huge bone of contention with these Armenians, because they were like, I don't want to be a second fucking class citizen. But you know, whatever. The Red Sultan started to use, he started using his army and also Kurdish bandits to kind of harass these Armenians. And then, later, both Turkish Muslims and Armenian Christians, revolutionary groups, they started working together. They were going to work together to depose the Red Sultan. The Red Sultan. They were working to oppose Abdul the Damned. And this is kind of where the original Young Turks came from. Now, the Young Turks were army officers who banded together to make basically like a secret political party amongst themselves, and a network out amongst the people. And at this point, they were sort of on the progressive side. They were about secularitarianism, because they were working with these Armenians, these Christians, and they wanted to overthrow Abdul the Damned. They wanted to overthrow the Red Sultan. They were actually working on doing a coup against him. And their political face was called the Committee of Union and Progress. So these guys took over briefly, and they took over, and they kind of deposed the Red Sultan, and they kind of opposed Abdul the Damned. But he was throwing a counter coup at the time, and he found himself back in power, however briefly. So, a couple things you got to know about this guy before we go any farther is that there are these imams in the Middle East today that call this fucker a hero. They're like, in a time when kufars were plotting against him, he dissolved the parliament, suspended the constitution, and killed the infidels. So, if you don't know what a kufar is, it's basically like a human animal. It's like a human commodity. The Quran's like, oh, you know, if you find a kufar, you could treat him like a cow. You could sell him to market, or you could slaughter him, and all this stuff. So that's what they think of you. that's what they think of people who don't believe in Islam. You're a cow. They call him the last Khalifa, or the last great Khalifa. Now, Khalifa is basically like a person that's the head of a caliphate, or caliph. This is the head of a caliphate, and basically what the caliphate is it's an organization that's struggling to take over the world. Antarctica, mine. Australia, mine. New Zealand, mine. New Jersey, mine. Elyria, Ohio, mine. I want it all. And until you get to that part, until you get it all, that's the caliph. So when this guy, when he takes back power, he actually institutes and injects this feeling of nationalism based on Islam into his people. And part of the thing that he's going to wind up having part of the thing that the country, or the empire, I should say, is going to have to get through is they're going to lose some land. And when you lose land, the Quran says it's a holy divine mandate. You've got to get that shit back. You can't lose part of the Balkans and just be like, yo, dog, I'm better off without it. Like, you got to get that shit back by divine edict. It's like, all of a sudden, you got to get that land back. You know, all of a sudden, it's not, you don't think it's funny? I think it's hilarious. Yeah, okay, so Hamid II united the empire through Islam, and he downplayed secularism. But it's important to notice at this point in time, it's important to note for sure, at this point in time, the empire was in collapse. It was in free fall. There was basically a handful of civilized, built up, developed areas that were being kept up. Like, the rest of it was just crumbling. After Vienna, 1683, it was just a slow crumbling of this Ottoman Empire, and it lasted not too much longer, but it lasted definitely like through the end of World War One. We're gonna get to the beginning of World War One here in this story. All right, so where are we at? Hold on. So the young Turks are there. They're steering. We did a coup. We did a counter coup. So this guy's back in charge, and he's injected the whole empire with big nationalism and fervor. And this is all going to lead to we're not even into the genocide right now. We're still in like the Clone Wars version of this story. So we're going to get right back to it after this. Adana is in a pitiable condition. The town has been pillaged and destroyed. It is impossible to estimate the number of the killed The corpses lie scattered through the streets. Friday, when I went out, I had to pick my way between the dead to avoid stepping on them. Saturday morning, I counted a dozen cartloads of Armenian bodies in 1/2 hour being carried into the river and thrown into the water. In the Turkish cemeteries, graves are being dug wholesale. This is written by Reverend Herbert Adams Gibbons. So, this is all leading up to the Adana massacre. This is one of those Hamidian massacres that I was talking about. So, on April... No one really knows how this thing started. They said it started as like a mutiny in Constantinople, or it started as a riot or a skirmish that got like way out of control. But April 14th, 1909, the Armenian quarter was attacked by a mob of wild Muslim Ottomans. It just sounds awesome. It quickly escalated into an organized effort with actually the Ottoman soldiers. Some say that their officers weren't there, like meaning that like the stupid like NCOs and soldiers and stuff were just acting on their own. Anyhow, put that aside. They fought for 2 days and over 2,000 Armenians died in the entire Adana province. 1,300 Assyrians, 4,437 Armenian buildings were torched. Half the city was in ruins. And this is the perfect genocide for what is to come. So everything is prologue. All right, 1912, the Balkan Wars. The Ottomans lost a large tract of land, and the Muslims were kicked out of the Balkans en masse. Ottomans were not happy with this influx of refugees, which I find that hilarious. Looking at today's fucking climate in debate about these refugees, like in this war, they got their asses whooped, and they were like, all you Muslims got to get the fuck out. So they were all going to the Ottoman, they were all going to Turkey, they were all going to the Ottoman Empire, and these Ottoman Turks were like, yo man, I don't like these Arab Muslims coming in here. What the fuck is up with that? It reminds me a lot of Saudi Arabia. Like, how come Saudi Arabia is not taking any of these Syrian refugees? I mean, I know the answer to that. I'm just saying, I was playing devil's advocate with myself. All right, let's find some good stuff here. In 1914, Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, entered World War I, and they entered World War I as always on the wrong side. These fuckers always in World War II they were on the wrong side. World War I they were on the wrong side, but they came in and this is actually one of the things the Red Sultan did. Is he worked with Kaiser Wilhelm, like the Emperor of Germany or whatever, and they were like, we're going to update your army, we're going to modernize your army, son, we're going to diversify your funds, we're going to build a fucking railroad track. And the railroad track's going to actually come into play a little bit later, but when you watch these little clips and these documentaries and these autobiographies, and you read these books about Abdul Hamid II, they always make it seem like he's out there like laying down this railroad himself, and you're like, he's not doing that. They're not doing that. Like, it's obvious that the Germans came down and laid this railroad for them. Okay, so I'm doing real good with all these outlandish words and stuff, but I am gonna fuck this one up. So just preparing you for it, because I'm gonna have to say it a couple times, but I'm still gonna fuck it up. In World War II, there was a Battle of Sarikamish. It took place in December 20. That wasn't so bad. I didn't do so bad. December 24th, 1914. The Ottomans got their asses kicked. They were trying to regain lands that they lost in the Russo-Turkish War in 1877 and 78. Like I said, it's their holy edict. They've got to get that land back. The Caliphate, Islam, has got to reclaim that land because they held it once for like a minute and a half or whatever, however long they held it. That's all you got to hold it for, is a minute and a half or whatever. There was this guy, the Minister of War, Enver Pasha. So there were, once they kicked the Red Sultan out, they got his exiled brother back, which is weird. Like, what are they doing exiling their brothers and leaving them around? Remember, the same fucking thing happened with the Barbary pirates. Like, we were able to affect the regime change because they left his brother high and dry, exiled in Egypt somewhere. So what they did is they had these three, like, ministers. They had, like, the Minister of War, who was this Enver Pasha. They had this Minister of the Navy, who was whatever, Pakistani Pasha. And then there was, like, this other Pasha, who was, like, of the interior. He was the real motherfucker, by the way. I don't remember what his name is, but he was the real motherfucker. You look at him, you're like, this guy just sits around eating fucking gyros and virgins all fucking day long. Okay, so this Enver Pasha, who's the Minister of War, totally blamed Armenians on this loss. He was like, oh, bro, there's no way I could lose. He's like, he realized that he has Armenian conscripts in his army. He's looking across the lines, and he's like, hey, these Russians have Armenians in their army. And then he's looking around on the ground, and he was like, we're fighting in the middle of this Armenia land or something. So he totally thinks he's been bamboozled. Meanwhile, this guy's just taking conscript. It's basically Armenian slaves. I mean, it's just foolish. You can't do that. So he totally blames this whole embarrassing loss on the Armenians. And in 1915, they started, April 1915, they started the siege of this town called Van, which was an Armenian city. The Armenians defended it from a Turkish siege, and they fucking won. They actually broke the siege. It's a bunch of like Armenian like farmers or whatever. So once we get up to this point, there's a few things that we have to talk about. One is, these young Turks, the war changed their footing. They were all about the secularitarianism, but the war changed all that shit. It was like their close proximity to German soldiers in World War I or whatever, but they flipped. And instead of being all about secularism, they flipped and they became all about nationalism and Mohammedism or Islamism. It's actually funny because they're actually the reason the Ottomans got into the First World War anyways. Like, all the old men, all the establishment were like, we're not going to get into World War I. Like, that's not our fucking thing. And all the Young Turks, who's this secret political party, they were like, no, we are going to do this, whether you guys like it or not. So these guys did this. So the empire's in decline. They're in crazy debt. No one really had money, but they're looking at these Armenians and they're like, hey man, these Armenians are doing well. There's lawyers, doctors, craftsmen. They had prosperity that made these savages envision these Christians as like potential. They're like, you know, we kind of want all the stuff that you have to keep our empire going. You know, what you're paying us denitude or whatever, but I mean, come on. Like, we like your stuff. I like your fucking chaise lounger. I would like to fucking steal your chaise lounger. So when the shit went down, like, churches were knocked down, churches were turned into stables, churches were turned into mosques. And because the empire was collapsing, the Turks were looking for money and they were looking for goods. So once the siege of Van happened, the powers that be were like, these motherfuckers have had it. They're going down. And they started doing this thing. The first thing that they did is they arrested, murdered, and deported all Armenian scholars, notable Armenians, and Armenian community leaders. And that just leads to a bunch of sad, crazy, fucking awful shit that we're going to get into right after these messages. Publicly announced that the Armenians were to leave after 5 days. The full meaning of such an order can scarcely be imagined by those who are not familiar with the particular conditions of the isolated region. A massacre, however horrible the word may sound, would have been humane in comparison with it. In a massacre, many may escape. But a wholesale deportation of this kind, of this country, meant lingering and even more dreadful death for nearly everyone. This was written by Leslie Davis, an American consulate. All right, so we're getting into this mass deportation problem that they had. Do you guys know what a a taco quesadilla is? I was entertaining tonight and I had to make a bunch of taco quesadillas, and they are heavy. They weigh heavy on a man's soul. I can tell you that. All right. I wanna, if I could, I would open up like a cooking truck. You know, like how they have those food trucks, and I would just specialize in grilled cheese sandwiches. I got a couple of great ones, man. I discovered this Sloppy Joe grilled cheese sandwich. Yeah, this is why the fucking terrorists hate us, man. This Sloppy Joe grilled cheese sandwich is where it is at, bro. And then there's a pizza grilled cheese where you put the mozzarella and the pepperonis and banana peppers on the inside, and then once you flip the sandwiches in the pan, you build a little tiny pizza on the top of the fucking sandwich using the same shit. It's a fucking rad. And I would include this taco quesadilla into that because it's the bomb diggity and it's the same fucking theme. It's the same theme. Anyhow, my love of grilled cheese sandwiches is taking over the show. All right, so after the siege of Van, the powers that be were like, these motherfuckers have had it. And they murdered, arrested, or deported Armenians of note. notable Armenians, community leaders, and Armenian scholars. And the idea for this is they wanted to get the opinion makers away so they can, I mean, it's right there. They're going to treat them like animals. This is why they're like fucking nailing horseshoes to their feet and stuff. They're just animals. They're just worthless livestock at this point. The whole idea of this is crazy. I'm going to get into some of this stuff. Confiscation of property. So they were, when they told these Armenians they had to leave, a lot of them started selling their stuff because they wanted money for travel. Like they were like, well, when we get here, we're going to need a couple bucks to buy tickets for the trains and yada yada and whatever's. So the Ottomans would buy stuff for pennies on the dollar or what, rupees, pences on the rupees or whatever it is. I don't know. I have a hard time dealing with monetary conversions right now, let alone in 1915. But what I'm saying is they were getting stuff for almost nothing for these people. And they were also taking stuff wholesale and just warehousing things. Like they were stealing all their chaise loungers and stuff. And then they were deporting them. They would walk them for a little while. Some of them would get into cattle cars on railroads that were built for goats. So they were like normal size cars, but they were like basically cut in half through the middle. So you could have goats on top and goats on the bottom. And they just pack people in there. And then they would also charge them for ticket prices. And I thought that was a real dick move. Eventually, these folks would run out of money. So, like, they would have to get out of the trains or not even get on the trains in some cases. And these people, they were walking for months. These journeys would last for months. And they were just walking out into the Syrian desert. See, it's thematic. We're back to Syria. This is episode 26, part 1 and part 2. So, they would get out, while they were walking, like, while they were going out there, while they were walking out there, the government had built these things called special organizations made of Kurdish bandits, and they would come and raid them. They'd come and raid the Armenian columns as they were like stumbling through or whatever. And these bandits were like, they knew how to spot things of value. So if these people had like any money on them or whatever, or any like jewelry and stuff. In some cases, they were stealing kids, they were selling them as slaves, and that sounds real shitty. And you're like, why are you just fucking saying that about these Turkish people? But I'm like, bros, it's right there. It's actually going to get a little bit deeper and crazier into that thing by the time we're fucking done. So we're death marching, and we're in the trains. We're going to the desert, and they would like beat people. And like animals would come out and pick at the wandering people. Starvation were happening. There's a lot of videos and stuff out there. They were taken a few like decades ago that they were able to catch some of the people that actually survived this trial, and they would talk about it. And they were like, "Yo, I just had to leave my granddad underneath a tree." Because I couldn't walk with him anymore. And, I was just hoping that he would die peacefully instead of, like, suffering through all this stuff. And the soldiers, the commanders of these soldiers were like, look, these were kuffars. So they were like, if you want to take these women, just do whatever you want with them. That's fine. So they would take these young girls and just, like, gang rape them. And afterwards, these young girls would go and they would drown themselves in the Euphrates, or they would walk out to the wilderness to be torn apart by animals because, like, the stuff they just survived was too crazy for them. I mean, that's some fucking shitty shit I don't even want to fucking talk about. once they got to where they were going, there were mass graves. There was evidence and stories of women who were drowning their babies because they didn't want their babies to grow up in the situation. They were drowning themselves. There was also fucking rare stories about cannibalism, where these people were eating women and children because they didn't have anything else going on. And all that is awful. So in the middle of this, Woodrow Wilson, the Count, I truly believe that the Sesame Street Count was patterned after Woodrow Wilson. He goes, the Americans offered to take all of the refugees. They offered to send boats to foot the bill for everything, all on their expense, to save these Armenians that were being driven into the desert. And the Ottoman government was like, nope, no, bro, it's all right. Catch me outside. You know, they refused the help. They didn't want any of that. So these Armenians, the few amount that's left of them, there were kids left, and they were like old people, normal people were there, but there was a lot of kids that were left. And they are going to this town, or this place, I should say. They're going to this place in the Syrian desert called Deir Zor. We're going to get to Deir Zor here after. So approaching this area of the desert called Deir Zor, all these people had survived the march. They'd survived the concentration camps that were put up, all the trials and tribulations that were set aside, the rapes, the beatings, the fucking wild animals, the constant pilfering of their goods. And this was the end of the line for them. The soldiers openly were selling children to Bedouins that would roll up, you know, on their camels and shit. Then they were like, the kind of attitude was, whether someone's going to kill, like someone or something's going to kill them before we get there, or we're going to have to do it ourselves. So once they get there, they were burning people alive. There's mass graves that were found. They had a method to save bullets where they would take a man and a woman, they would tie them together and throw them in the river or the lake, and they would shoot one of them. So as the dead body would sink and submerge, it would just drag the other one down with them. And these things were like, these skeletons and stuff, well, these bodies would like get into the sediment. So there's these stories about people excavating that area, and they would just like brush aside like what they think was a rock, and it wound up to be like a top of a human skull, and they were like, what? And they would just like dig in and start going in a little bit, and they would find like another one and another one. It's like it's this prodigious mass grave in this area. So by the grace of whatever God is out there looking out for these people, the orphanages and hospitals started filling up with Armenian children, and they soon realized that the only way of the Armenians are going to have a future is if they save these kids. And you're like, well, okay, well, all right, we're down for it. But when the Ottomans found out that these hospitals and orphanages were housing these Armenian kids, they started cutting off funding for them. Like, they were like, get rid of these Armenian kids, we'll turn your funding back on for you. That's fucking crazy town, man. That's that's some evil shit. Like, they do not want these Armenians out of there. It's just this perceived slight of this battle plan. This fucking guy probably didn't know his ass from his hole in the ground anyways. So we're kind of fast forward to today. and see where we are with this with Turkey and this genocide after this. Dude, I gotta tell you, I don't really listen to these ads as they're playing, these reads and stuff. But I just did catch the end of that, and I'm like, man, that Test of the Scorpion book was really good. It was really good. The Scorpion Strikes one was really good, too. And then I just realized I was marking out for myself, because I'm like, yeah, the Djinn Jihad was awesome. Man, that Ages was fantastic. Who wrote and drew all these things, motherfucker? One talented son of a bitch. All right, so nowadays, there's a huge problem because Turkey refuses to acknowledge that this Holocaust or / genocide, whatever, actually happened. They say all kinds of crazy shit like, our soldiers were protecting these people as they were walking through the desert trying to get to Syria. Or, anything like that. Like, even though Turkey, there's at least 29, the time that I read the article, there were 29 countries that recognize this genocide. But Turkey's like, no, bro, it wasn't a genocide. All these people just decided to leave the country the most inconvenient way possible. And we just watched them go. We helped them along the way. And then when we got to the end, we burned them all. Like, it was like Chutes and Ladders. It was exactly like Chutes and Ladders. Nowadays, even inside Turkey, people serve prison terms if they talk about it, and you'll be hard pressed to find a Turkish person to talk about this honestly. There's actually a great bit. I'll put it on the Abercast Facebook page. Hold on, I'm drying out. I'll put this video in the Abercast Facebook page, but it's of the hot chick from the Young Turks. I don't know what their names are. I know it's like Sanka, whatever. I don't know. I don't know. But it's the female that's with them. One of the females is with, I don't know how many females are with them. But she's like trying to give this talk at a college, and they like, hey kid, do you want to ask a question about how awful Donald Trump is? And he's like, yeah, I do, for sure. And they like give a microphone to him, and he's like, first I want to ask if you admit that there was a genocide, an Armenian genocide. And this woman loses her fucking mind. It's hilarious. So in this day and age, it just makes you want to know how come, like, what are these, why are they naming themselves the Young Turks? Like, these people did nothing positive. They forced their empire into World War I. Then they tried to depose the Red Sultan, Abdullah the Damned. And then next they went on to just kill a lot of fucking people. And then they're just like, no, dude, it's just like a news organization. It's just a name. It doesn't mean anything. Whatever. I don't buy it. I believe it means something. And I guess maybe they formed it before there was like Google or like podcasts or something. So they didn't think anyone was going to be able to figure out what it meant. I don't know. But my friends, here we are. We're at the end of this tale.
Stigmata Studios presents The Scorpion Strikes. In this comic book, a terrorist called the Scorpion is transported to a secret CIA prison. He quickly turns the tables on the guards and administrators and releases the prisoners. A well-armed anarchist called Constituent Zero assembles a team and fights to take the prison back. This story is a dark political action thriller. The Scorpion's actions set the stage perfectly for the Jin Jihad. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com. Stigmata Studios presents The Test of the Scorpion. In this comic book, while the Jin Jihad is raging on one side of the city, the terrorist called the Scorpion sets a secondary attack in motion as he obtains a small tactical nuclear bomb. A mysterious, ever-living warrior called Cyrus the Dead Guy steps forward to test the faith of the Scorpion and his lunatic followers. This is an action-adventure story. It's a bit of swashbuckler that wraps up the Jihad stories. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, The Test of the Scorpion, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
I'll see you guys next week. Oh, I'm gonna throw up. I fucked it up.